an awful lot.
Yes.
Even if you have only two elements to use, I can invent them.
And it also turns out that I don't have an example, and the reason is that...
Because you have an infinite set, I cannot imagine an example.
Transfinite sets, right?
Yes.
It was infinite, right?
Yes.
Sorry?
It was infinite.
What was infinite?
V.
Yeah.
Yes. It's
V, I assume, is
V
Gödel's set
I
theory.
think you said it's infinite.
Yes. It's
And then to
all
invent
sets.
a map that respects all properties, that
Yes.
mathematically be defined, that's it.
I mean, V is a standard notation in set theory for the whole
Yeah,
set
of
theoretical
course.
universe, and I
Yeah.
think that's what it's intended to be.
Yeah.
I've got
Yes.
a sense of it.
So that's an axiom that it exists.
Yes, that's the
But-
axiom. And from the axiom, it also then follows, it turns out, that you cannot have an example.
Is that a good axiom?
You cannot have an explicit. You cannot have an explicit example of what
Yeah,
what
that's
J
what I
is.
wondered about.
Yes, but that's okay because I'm not. I don't want to have. I'm looking for the structures that I get from it. I'm not actually looking for what exactly it is.
But if I
Because
would
the
say something does
mathematics
not
says-
exist, then I also would know that I cannot have an explicit example. So,
True.
can you
But
exclude that it does not exist?
Can I exclude it?
Yeah.
Well,
When you put an axiom, you have to be free. And are you free
I have to be free in what sense?
in making the axiom?
Yes.
Why is that? I don't understand.
Well,
I mean,
well,
it's perhaps like I mean, with all the actions in set theory, it's like, you know, if you
Yeah, but it has to be independent. I mean, you.
Well, I mean,
Is it proven to be independent? This is the question, isn't it? Is the wholeness axiom proven to be independent of the other?
The other axis is set theory.
yeah. Well, it seems to be yes. It's not proven to be independent, but it's.
I think
But
we would
so
have
far
heard from
there
set
are no-
theorists if it had been.
Yeah.
I certainly don't think it is. I mean, it's a reflection. It's
So it's as you
reflection
use the
of-
Riemann hypothesis. Suppose that the Riemann hypothesis is true,
Yeah.
and then you prove something.
Yeah.
But you actually don't know whether it's independent, right?
They're very weird, these axioms, like the wholeness axiom and set theory, from what I've understood of them, these, the so-called reflection principle type axioms. And they're very... I mean, there is something, I mean, this is very interesting, but there is something, I think I said to you last year, that I find terribly counterintuitive about it, conceptually, which is that you're taking as your starting point this wholeness axiom, which is connected with this Gödelian and Platonist vision of the whole universe of mathematical objects as somehow existing already as a completed, all-encompassing totality out there of a rather static and Platonistic sort. Really the ultimate vision ontologically of static being, maybe the whole of being, is completely static. And then out of that, trying to get some mathematical clue as to how one ought to think about the implicate order, which is really the extreme opposite in terms of the way that it leads us to conceive the whole of being as something intrinsically dynamic and standing in conceptually almost in complete opposition to a kind of Platonistic vision of this kind. I'm not saying that destroys your project, but it just seems to introduce a strong conceptual tension in the guiding ideas right from the beginning.
Well, maybe it's because I don't really see it that way. Because to me, it is very, very dynamic. I mean, the axiom itself. The axiom, sorry.
Oh, I see.
The axiom itself is
The
very
wholeness
dynamic.
axiom.
Yes, the wholeness axiom is a movement in a way. You can see that as a movement. So that is dynamic. And then why do I do it in set theory, for instance? Well, because I wanted to make it as fundamental as possible. Categories, maybe, yes. But this is where I started, and I feel that I don't really have a problem with it.
No, I mean just maybe just different ways,
Positioning that
different
way.
styles of thinking. I mean, to me, the wholeness axiom is something which I can't imagine how you give a kind of category theoretic version, because it seems to be completely against the whole spirit of category theory.
Why is it against the spirit of category theory?
Well, because it's assuming that you start from this completed totality, V, and try to introduce by looking at these kind of reflection principles, ways of thinking how it could reflect parts of all the parts of itself within itself. But that's to think of, you know, there being one all-encompassing universe in which all mathematical structures live. And regarding the idea of category theory is,
But you're talking about
you don't think of it, everything as living inside one single universe. You think it is related, right? Yeah.
But you're talking about the completed, as it were something that outside there that you could totally define. But isn't that part of it? It is not totally definable, is it?
Well, it's infinite, and it's not a set, for instance.
Well, no, it's not a set
an
because it's
object,
obviously a
right.
proper class, but V is not a set. I mean, you know,
Right.
yeah, that's quite clear.
So there are
V is not a set.
those ideas, yeah.
But it's the absolute universe. It's the absolute, you know, it's the absolute totality of all sets in the way.
But
so
not
it's
something you
Gödel
can
thinks
back,
about.
you see.
That's why. No, I'm sorry. I'm not saying.
So subtle.
And the thing that I'm in category theory, the thing that I had a slight problem with was the objects, because it seemed to me at the time that you always had to have an object, and so right. So
Yeah.
right. So my object here is then the you could say the mathematical universe.
Well,
Is
the
that-
absolute totality of all possible objects in the sense, if you think like a Platonist like Gödel thought. No, I'm just trying to articulate what seems to me, but this just may be my subjective impression, a slight conceptual tension in the starting point. So the implicate order on the one hand,
Yes.
which is all about ultimate dynamicity, if you want to use ultimate flow, ultimate becoming is ultimate, being is
Exactly.
derivative,
Exactly.
and the Gödelian vision of the set theoretic universe in which static being is ultimate and becoming is a entirely derived and illusory.
But it's not. It's not to me, because also
no.
I'm changing it in a way, because I'm
Yeah.
changing the axioms. I'm adding an axiom, and I'm adding a dynamic axiom.
Yes, this is where I guess I'm not seeing where that dynamic aspect of the wholeness axiom comes in. I don't.
Well, it's a movement. The embedding itself. It's a function, you could say, but it's.
Well, okay, I'm saying that.
Is there any way to, I think, as you said, it was the large cardinals, and truly has to do that with these inaccessible cardinals and definability. When you say everything we can define is preserved, then obviously this embedding should do something where we can not define something. So, what's your idea? Is there some shifting around of this very, very large sets which we have no hope whatever to grasp? Is this what this mapping J does? And is J unique, by the way? Is there only one J? Is there anything known? What do the set theorists say?
About J.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be unique. No, there can be other. Could be other J's. Mm-hmm. And yes, this is.
But they have the whole same structure, that's what I'm saying. All the J has the same structure, whatever it is. The same structure, J. As an operation, as an embedding.
But
I mean, it says the left distributive, self-distributive holds forever.
Well,
It's a little, as I understand it, it's a little bit like, and I think in fact, the way people like Gödel thought about it was actually explicitly guided by Leibniz's ideas about the monads, that all the monads each, as it were, see the whole of reality, but each from its own individual point of view. They all reflect the universe, and in some sense there's a supreme monad, which is God, which reflects the entire universe because it is its own ultimate expression of kind of self-reflection. I know this is all very pictorial language, but to my surprise, I had an extremely interesting talk in Paris about this about a month ago. These ideas of Leibniz and the monadology were a very, very strong guide on Gödel when he thought about set theoretic axioms, and particularly reflection principles, of which the wholeness axiom is an example. So, there is a kind of underlying metaphysics in the background there. But it's one which intuitively, to me, seems to be completely opposed to the spirit of Bohm and the implicate order. But that's just my own take on it.
But is J considered to be mathematically defined?
no, it will.
No.
No,
No.
it's